Greetings, my name is Shekhar Shah and I'm speaking from the National Council of Applied Economic Research in New Delhi. It's a privilege to be presenting this session on the security of property rights for land and housing at the IEA World Congress this year. Secure and enforceable property rights are a cornerstone of economic development and social justice. Ever since Hernando de Soto coined the term dead capital, many countries and institutions have invested considerable resources into improving the security of property rights and the marketability of land and housing. The Sustainable Development Goals today cover land and property rights. However, despite the importance of secure tenure for development, there is as yet no global consensus on what security of tenure means in different contexts, how to measure it, and how best to promote it. Hence the search for a common denominator in the title of this session. Traditionally, governments who have sought to improve tenure security have focused on de jure or legal tenure, which is achieved by formalizing land-related rights in regularization and land titling programs, for example. There are two potential problems with this approach. First, growing evidence shows that people make decisions on how to use land and invest in it based on how they perceive property rights, quite separate from the de jure nature of those rights. Second, the second problem is that titling by itself, providing de jure land title, may fail to confer adequate tenure security to beneficiaries because of weak institutions and weak enforcement capacity, or the presence sometimes of alternative or customary modes of tenure. To discuss all this today, it's my pleasure to present today's 5 panelists. First up will be Malcolm Childress, Executive Director of the Global Land Alliance and Co-Director of Prindex, who will present the progress that has been made on designing and deploying Prindex, which is a consistent measure of tenure security and perceptions of tenure security across 140 countries. And he will present the most recent findings from the Prindex project. Malcolm's presentation will then be followed by Paul Petitor, Senior Land Administration Specialist at the World Bank. Paul has used the Prindex data to explore how factors associated with violent conflicts affect individual assessments of tenure security, both in the short and in the long run. Paul will be followed by Joseph Fairtag, Research Fellow at ODI, who will focus on the relationship between tenure security and broader development outcomes, including the SDGs. Our next speaker will be Cheryl Doss at the University of Oxford with a very interesting presentation on land tenure security as perceived from both within and from outside the household, and the focus will be on women's rights. Finally, the session will conclude with a presentation by Stephen Laurie, Senior Associate at the Center for International Forestry Research, who looks at the factors that condition the effectiveness of tenure security interventions in sub-Saharan Africa, and in particular, the role of customary tenure systems in securing property rights. I believe the work that these 5 panelists will be sharing with you will lay out different perspectives on how we might converge on a common denominator in thinking about property rights. Before handing over to the first speaker, I should add that my own institution, NCAER, is part of these efforts to understand better property rights in the development context. NCR will be leading the Prindex work in India starting soon. NCR teams will be working with ODI and with Prindex on assessing perceptions of tenure security within and across India's many states and how such perceptions actually vary within households. This work will at the same time also measure user perspectives on NCR's own Land Records and Services Index, an index that is having some considerable traction in India's states on improving land records. I look forward to sharing the results from this unique data set that will combine Prindex India and the Land Records and Services Index during next year's IEA World Congress. I hope you will find today's 5 presentations stimulating. I'd encourage you to be in touch with the presenters if you have follow-up questions. Thank you very much for joining this session.